On this day, the road workers had no idea that an unexpected discovery was waiting for them in the midst of garbage and yellowed grasses along the side of the highway. A red luggage case stood out like a sore thumb against the wilted vegetation. At first, they thought that someone had simply forgotten their suitcase, but their intuition told them something else. With a disturbing premonition, the men opened the case and froze in horror. The body of a young woman lay there, curled up in an unnatural position. Even for the experienced workers, it was a chilling reminder of the horrific crime that had taken place. As it turned out, this young woman had suffered one of the most brutal deaths imaginable. Valeria Reyes, 24, grew up in a cozy suburb of New York City in a loving family. She was the eldest daughter, who was trusted by her three younger brothers. From an early age, Valerie was distinguished by her cheerful disposition, sincere smile, and ability to get along with people. So it was no surprise that she was always surrounded by a wide circle of friends. Valeria's relationship with her mother was especially close. The women shared their most intimate secrets as if they were best friends. Valeria had many talents. She was good at drawing, singing, and dreamed of becoming a professional tattoo artist. Under the guidance of her older brother, who had already achieved some success in this field, she persevered in her studies. Together, they planned to open a studio where they could realize their creative ideas. Meanwhile, Valeria worked part-time in a small cozy bookstore, where a special atmosphere of knowledge and creativity always reigned. In January 2018, Valeria's life changed dramatically. On a popular dating site, she met an attractive and gallant 26-year-old Venezuelan, Javier de Silva, who had recently moved to New York. The young man told her a touching story about how he had to flee his crisis-ridden homeland to save his own life. Because of this, he never finished his college education. Now Javier was working hard in a restaurant, trying to build a new life in a foreign land. Valeria was truly saddened by the fate of a bright man in a difficult situation. After a few dates, romantic feelings flared up between the young people. Their relationship developed rapidly and violently, but lasted only 3 months. Javier turned out to be too intrusive and was already hinting at an imminent marriage, which scared the girl. Valeria felt that everything was happening too quickly, because she was not yet ready for such a serious step. So having grown wiser, she decided to end the affair. At first, Javier made a good impression on Valeria's family. He seemed to genuinely care about the girl and wanted only the best for her. But as soon as she expressed her desire to end the relationship, his behavior changed dramatically. Javier refused to accept the breakup and tried to get Valeria back in every way possible. He sent her dozens of messages every day, arranged random meetings in public, and begged for reconciliation. One September day in 2018, Javier called Valeria with a strange story. Allegedly, he had accidentally used her bank card to pay for something online. Now, he desperately needed to meet her and return the money. But Valeria immediately suspected a trick. Most likely it was just an excuse to see him again. She checked with her friend and asked her to deal with Javier herself so that he would never bother her about it again. It seemed that a serious conversation with her friend really worked on the persistent suitor. The calls stopped, and no more messages were received. Valeria breathed a sigh of relief. She could finally return to her normal life, full of small joys and exciting plans for the future. But she had no idea that the worst was yet to come. On January 24, 2019, a strange incident occurred. Javier wrote to an old friend of his that he had caught Valeria in bed with another man. This message caused the girl's surprise and indignation because it could not be true. She and Javier had long since broken up and had no contact with each other. In addition, Valeria had been dating another guy all this time. So why would Javier make up such a strange story? January 27th was a very joyful day for Valeria. She and her family were celebrating her father's birthday. Nothing seemed to portend trouble. But the next evening, when she returned home after her shift at the bookstore, she called her mother in a state of near hysteria. She was sobbing and screaming into the phone that someone was trying to kill her. Valeria admitted that she had been suffering from obsessive anxiety for several days and constantly felt someone's ominous presence. The news of the brutal murders of women in their own homes made her paranoid. The girl no longer felt safe in her apartment. Trying to calm her daughter down, her mother asked her if she was afraid of anyone in particular. But Valeria could not answer anything. She just kept sobbing into the phone. After a long conversation, the girl seemed to calm down a bit. They agreed that the next day the mother would come to her and stay until her daughter felt better. Before going to bed, Valeria sent her mother a message that she had calmed down and was going to sleep. She had no idea that these words would be her last to her family. The next morning, January 29th, the worried mother waited in vain for a call from her daughter. Numerous attempts to call Valeria's cell phone were unsuccessful. After several rings, the phone went to voicemail. Around noon, the worried woman decided to go to her daughter's apartment and make sure she was okay. At work at the bookstore, Valeria was also waited on in vain. Usually punctual and diligent, this time she did not show up for her shift and did not inform anyone of her absence. This had never happened before because she valued her position and the team she had been working with for about 2 years. The bewildered manager tried to call Valeria, but to no avail. The phone was turned off. Anxiety quickly spread throughout the family. Valeria didn't show up for the dinner she had been looking forward to and planning since yesterday. Her family dialed her number again and again, but encountered a deafening wall of silence. Recalling the recent disturbing conversation, they felt the icy fingers of fear squeezing their hearts. On the morning of January 30th, it became clear that the family could not cope alone. They went to the police and filed a report on Valeria's disappearance. The investigators' first suspect was Valeria's ex-boyfriend, Javier, whose sinister intentions the family immediately informed them of. A thorough inspection of the girl's apartment did not yield any significant clues. There were no signs of a struggle or hints that Valeria had been taken away by force. The only unusual detail was small bloodstains on the pillowcase in the bathroom. However, the police decided that it could have been a simple cut or nosebleed. Law enforcement officers immediately began searching for the missing woman. After contacting her mobile operator, they learned that Valeria's phone had been switched to airplane mode on the night of January 28th at about 3 in the morning. It has not been turned on since then. But the most disturbing fact was the information that someone had accessed her cloud storage and thoroughly studied all her photos, videos, and messages. It seemed that the criminal was trying to find the information he needed. Another disturbing detail is that at 5 a.m. on January 29th, 2 hours after the phone was turned off, someone withdrew $1,000 from Valeria's bank account. Surveillance cameras captured a man driving up to the ATM in a black Honda, quickly taking the money and disappearing. Valeria herself was not seen in the vicinity. Using the car's license plate number, law enforcement officers quickly determined that the car belonged to Javier, the same ex-boyfriend that the missing girl's mother had immediately identified. He was automatically included in the list of prime suspects. During the search of Javier's house, no direct evidence of his involvement in Valeria's disappearance was found. However, surveillance footage showed that on the evening of January 28th, he left his home in a black Honda and headed to his ex-girlfriend's place of residence. Investigators personally checked Valeria's phone. There had been no incoming calls or messages from Javier in recent months. Obviously, the girl had not invited him or arranged a meeting. So what was he doing there at night uninvited? Even more suspicious was Javier's strange behavior immediately after these events. He turned off his phone so that his movements could not be tracked. At 6 a.m., his cell phone turned on briefly near Harrison, Connecticut. At 7:30, the device was detected in Greenwich. It was only at 9:43 that Javier returned home to Queens, which was confirmed by cameras near his home. He came home in different clothes than he had worn in the evening. Javier brought a small duffel bag with him, which he carried into the house and left without it a few minutes later. All of this was very disturbing to the detectives. Later, investigators found out another interesting detail. On the eve of Valeria's disappearance, Javier posted an old photo of them together on Instagram. Why did he do this? Maybe he wanted to show everyone that they were still together, or was it a hint to someone? While the police were gradually making progress in their investigation, Valeria's family and friends kept trying to find the girl on their own. They put up posters with her photo, asked all their friends and passers-by if anyone had seen her, and checked all the places she usually visited. However, none of the leads led to a result. A week passed in anxious anticipation, sleepless nights followed by exhausting searches. And then, on February 5th, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. Road workers spotted the same red luggage case, which immediately led them to their worst suspicions. When they opened it, What they saw made them immediately call the police. Inside the case was the mutilated body of a young woman. Her hands and feet were tightly tied with rope. Her mouth was sealed with a thick layer of duct tape. Her light shirt was torn, and her jeans were torn and soiled. The girl was not wearing shoes. The attention was drawn to the terrible wound on her head, which had recently been oozing blood. The forensic team quickly identified the deceased as Valeria Reyes, who had gone missing the day before. Her parents recognized their beloved daughter, despite the terrible state of her body. During the autopsy, the gruesome details of the murder came to light. Before her death, the girl was hit hard on the head with a blunt object, and then, while still alive, she was stuffed into a suitcase and left to die. The last moments of Valeria's life, locked in a cramped space, were filled with unbearable pain and despair. She died slowly and painfully from lack of oxygen. All the evidence pointed to Javier da Silva's involvement in this brutal murder. However, it was not easy to prove his guilt. The only direct evidence was Valeria's bank card found in his wallet. During interrogation, the suspect gave an extremely dubious version of events. He claimed that he had accidentally found the card and the girl's identification documents in a bar. This sounded implausible and raised even more questions. The investigators presented Javier with all the information they had gathered: surveillance footage, details about his car, and the movement of his phone that fateful night. They assured him that they knew about his presence in Valeria's apartment. Then the suspect changed his story. He admitted that he had been very drunk that night and could indeed have come to Valeria's place, but he did not remember anything. However, when the detective showed him a photo of his ex-girlfriend's mutilated body in a suitcase, Javier broke down. He confessed and burst into tears. He began to try to justify himself in a confused and incoherent manner. According to his version, he came to Valeria's house that night at her invitation. They had consensual sex, albeit in a rough way, but at some point the girl fell and hit her head on the floor, losing consciousness. Javier insisted that he tried to help his beloved. He performed artificial respiration and heart massage, but it was all in vain. Afraid that he might be accused of murder, he tried to hide the traces of the crime. He tied Valeria up, taped her mouth shut, put her in a suitcase, and took her out of town. According to him, he did all this in a state of passion, not realizing what he was doing. When the investigators asked why he had to tie and tape the mouth of a motionless, possibly dead girl, Javier could not answer. Then he began to tell a completely unbelievable story. He claimed that he had deliberately used Valeria's card and car to get into the police's sights as quickly as possible. In his opinion, this would have made the investigation easier. Javier then spent another $4,350 from the victim's account. During the searches of the suspect's apartment, the police found Valeria's phone and laptop, which he managed to take away. Initially, Javier tried to destroy these things by throwing them into the river, but then for some reason he returned and retrieved them. Thanks to the victim's fingerprints, he was able to access Valeria's cloud storage and an app that showed the balance on her card. For investigators, the whole story sounded extremely implausible and contradictory. There were too many unconvincing coincidences and inconsistencies. They immediately suspected Javier of premeditated, pre-planned murder of Valeria, and the available evidence only confirmed his guilt. In the end, the suspect's version of the case finally fell apart after a thorough examination of the body. It showed signs of struggle and violence. Blood and DNA of the killer were found under the girl's nails, on her skin and clothes. Javier's fingerprints were found on Valeria's neck and chest. His genetic material was everywhere, on the suitcase, in the car, on the victim's belongings. It became clear that he had committed this heinous crime in a thoughtful and consistent manner. The suspect was immediately arrested and officially charged with the brutal murder of 24-year-old Valeria Reyes. Under the pressure of overwhelming evidence, Javier da Silva eventually pleaded guilty in court. On February 5, 2020, a hearing was held in the case of the premeditated murder of Valeria Reyes. In his speech, the prosecutor drew the jury's attention to the defendant's thoughtful, consistent actions, how he closely followed the victim's every move, obsessively pursued her, and then brutally murdered her. During the court hearing, Javier had to listen to many angry accusations from Valeria's grieving family. Her mother's speech was particularly emotional. She could not hold back her tears and could barely speak through her sobs. She called her daughter's murderer a real monster, selfish, heartless and cruel. Javier's lawyers tried to justify his actions as a sudden outburst of anger and jealousy. They talked about the defendant's difficult childhood, his depressive state after breaking up with Valeria, and his drug use shortly before the tragedy. They claimed that all this affected his emotional state and pushed him to make the fatal decision. They even read out several letters from former friends from Venezuela who characterized Javier as a sensitive and decent guy who had simply lost his way. But these attempts did not affect the jury's opinion at all. On September 3, 2021, the court handed down a sentence of 30 years in prison. For 28-year-old Javier da Silva, this actually meant spending most of his life behind bars. In addition, as it turned out during the investigation, the defendant was in the United States illegally. He entered the country on May 8, 2017, under a visa waiver program. However, his 90-day stay expired on August 5th of the same year. Javier ignored this requirement and continued to stay in the United States in violation of the law. Therefore, after serving his 30-year sentence, he will be immediately deported to his home country, Venezuela. And there he will probably face another trial. Valeria Reyes' death came as a real shock to her family. They had no idea that a simple acquaintance on social media could lead to such a terrible tragedy. This high-profile case has made many people think about the dangers of virtual relationships and the threats that lurk in the real world. Valeria will forever be remembered by her family as a bright, cheerful, and devoted girl whose life ended too soon and too cruelly. I hope this story has not left anyone indifferent. Let the case of Valeria Reyes be a warning to each of us. Be careful, don't trust strangers, and don't hesitate to ask for help if you feel threatened. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.